So did either of you take formal guitar lessons, or music lessons of any kind growing up?
I had 3 lessons when I moved back to Montreal. I would have been about 16, I guess. So Mrs. Ballard. And she immediately said, "Oh, you got lots of bad habits. You've got to break all those bad habits." But I played her a little thing that was really quite good. I mean, I was pretty good by 16. She went, "Oh, no. And she had my foot up on a little stool and reading these. And at the end of the lesson, I said, "Mrs. Ballard, could you just play me something? Just anything, so I can hear someone who can really do this." And she, "Oh, no, I got another student coming in." After 3 lessons and me realizing finally that this woman couldn't really play the guitar, all she could do was show me page 6 and tell me how bad I was. I just thought, no.
So that's the extent of your formal...
Yeah, that's it, yeah.
I had my formal training after I'd been playing for 40 years. Because where I had my studio in Sydney, downtown there on Sussex Street, just a couple of doors down was the Australian Classical Guitar Institute. Oh. And over the years, as had listened and embraced all of the different styles of music, including flamenco and classical, I had never had any training at all, any formal training, or I had never had a lesson. Mm. And but over through my classical catalog, there were certain tunes, even though I didn't like all of the classical stuff, there were certain tunes that were just absolutely fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to learn more about them, and I had a list of those songs, and I took them into the Australian Classical Guitar Institute and met with the teacher there. And fortunately, every piece of music that I was interested in, they had there in their catalog. And it was a twofold purpose. One was that I wanted to improve my reading, and this would give me an excuse to learn more about reading the guitar, because I was a very poor reader the whole time. And so he took me through the whole process of the footstool and why the guitar is in this position, because there was a piece of music where I'd never had that stretch in anything. This piece that goes, let's see. I can't even play today. I can't even think of it now.
Another one.
That was written by a South American. I can't remember his name, but there were 3 of his tunes that I learned that were just so fantastic. The other one is... I can't play this guitar very well, but... and another one that had the weirdest changes.
pick.
And this guy, this is in the 1700s that this guy wrote that stuff.
Oh, you're using a flat guitar. I bet your classical teacher didn't teach you to do that, eh? Your own hybrid style of classical.
So, anyway, yeah,
And how long did you do that?
I went for only 3 or 4 lessons, and then in my home in the library, I had my little classical guitar set up. It was like a hobby aside from my professional guitar playing. I just looked at it as a hobby because I was really learning new stuff.
Yeah, that's good.
So I had my little music stand, my
Yeah,
footstool, my classical guitar was sitting there, and it was fun to just
zone out.
So that's the extent of your formal.
That was the beginning and end of my formal training.
So you both of you had sort of 3 or 4 lessons in total.
Yeah.
And
But
that's
hundreds of lessons through other players.
Well, when I got into the studios,
Picked up something from Sam and then it was
you always learn. Every time you come around to play,
sure.
you learn something. As guitar players, I remember when I was first working in the studio with Larry Carlton. We wouldn't even get our guitars out of the case till he would say, "Show me a lick." It's like we're just hungry for this new lick. But when I started doing session work in LA, it was fortunate that they didn't write much for guitar players.
That's right.
We had a chord chart, which was basically a roadmap.
Same here.
Yeah,
Most producers are keyboard players,
yeah.
and they don't know how to write for guitar. They don't know. They just do that thing.
Well, and the thing is, because most of the guitar players couldn't read it if they would have written it.
That's right.
Like on the Motown stuff, there was 3 of us guitar players. None of us could read.
No.
And we'd sit there and just work out our parts.
Yeah.
And or if I was on a session by myself as a guitar player, they wanted me to create. They didn't know what kind of sounds we could do or what licks we knew or whatever. They just wanted us to play, our thing. Whereas string section, naturally, they have to write their parts out.
I remember once I did a show with Doug Ashdown. Remember?
Yeah.
And it was at the Town Hall in Sydney with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra.
Uh-huh.
And behind me were the string players. I think they were the cello players directly behind me. And one of the cello players looked over and saw my chord chart, A minor to G. He said,
Yeah.
"That's all you get?" And I went, "Yeah." And I went and looked at his. I thought, "Oh, you poor guy." Covered in dots and everything. So it was interesting that chord charts are. That's what they did.
They could be tough on bass players too. The Motown bass parts were usually written out. Some of the keyboard parts, but those guys could read. But what was funny was the film calls, because a lot of times we would be there with the full orchestra in those days, and the guitar player, we may not have anything until bar 96, but you better know how to count 96 bars and play that, whatever you had to play it at the right spot.
That's right, yeah, you better count.
Yeah.
Yeah, because if they had to start again, I guess they weren't too happy.
Oh, no. So.
No, that's one lucky thing about being a guitar player.
Yeah.
It's really, as I say, most producers don't really know how to write for it.
Is that still the case?
Look, I haven't done any sessions in so long. That,
well, I'll tell you, when I first started doing sessions, there were 2 kinds of guitar players. They were the guys that, like myself, that came from more of a country thing, where we, like James Burton was in there, and myself, and we didn't read. And then you had guys like Barney Kessel and Joe Pass who could read, and Howard Roberts, great guitar players in their own right, but they weren't interested in rock and roll, and they hadn't learned any of those licks, and they hadn't put strings on their guitar that they could bend. They just weren't interested in that. Wasn't their thing.
Tedesco, Tommy Tedesco, was it?
Yeah, Tommy.
He was a reader, wasn't he?
He was a reader.
Yeah, he play what he was told to play, and
Yeah.
he probably had no idea.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, those were the guys they called. But later on, when guys like Larry Carlton and Lee Ritenour came in, and Steve Lukather, these guys could do all the other stuff, plus they could read. I tell the story about this one time. The one time that I had a solo written out for me, and I'm sitting there trying to figure the solo out.
Sweating.
And Larry had come in, and he was just new on the scene, but I knew him very well. And he came in kind of late and was setting up his little amp, and just barely sat down. As he sat down, I reached over and grabbed his chart, because he only had chords and I had this. And the guy's counting the tune off, and I swear to God, Larry never missed a note. It was unbelievable. But see, what that was, we were doing an Andy Williams album, and he was recording tunes that had already been hits by other people. And that particular song had a guitar solo on it, and they wrote it out. Now that's where it's important to know how to read for guys that are wanting to get work. Say if you're go to work in Las Vegas or New York on the Broadway shows, or if you're doing a gig with someone who you're having to play the part that someone else played on the record, that's going to be written out. So it's going to be tough. You need to know how to read for that reason if you're going to be a working guitar player. Fortunately, when we play on the original records and just come up with some solo off the cuff, we're not reading it. We're just playing it. We're creating it.
So then somebody else who is going to play it later on, they got to learn it.
That's right. Yeah.
And,
It's funny actually to hear, a lot of those Richard Clapton songs that I came up with solos, and to hear, I see them on YouTube with other guitar players playing
your
songs
part
that I came up with 32 years ago.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting too.
What would you say is there a difference between sort of session player scene in the States compared to Australia? Is there a difference in the way things occur in the studio and the approach?
I don't know. The thing about in the States, and especially LA, and Nashville and New York, there's so much of it going on. I mean, it's changed a bit. It's still an everyday occurrence in Nashville with a lot of sessions going on at one time. LA, I remember when I was really in the thickest of things there, you can understand why so much was going on there. Just because the way LA is laid out, there's so much room. You've got your film stuff, your MGM, your 20th Century Fox, Warner Brothers, all of those film companies, their facilities are so massive. They're all like Disneyland. I mean, there's just sound stages. Same way with your TV stations, CBS, NBC, ABC. They're huge buildings with, there may be 6 shows going on there at one time, and every studio in that building has room for its own audience, its own backstage, production, whatever, and then you've got all of the major record companies and all of the major studios there. So, I mean, you can just go from one thing to the other. You might do a film in the morning and a record date in the afternoon and another record date or a TV show at night. At one time, I was doing 3 or 4 TV shows at one time, which was the Campbell, the Monkees, and the Bill Cosby, all at one time, plus doing record dates in between. So there was just a massive amount of work. I mean,
well, I must say in Sydney too. In the 80s, before computers came along, I was one of the half a dozen guitar players working, and we would do one in the morning. And could you put a solo? Oh, I can't right now. I got a session at 11, but I'll come back after and we'd just be kind of zooming all around Sydney, going from one studio to another.
Yeah.
The good old days.